Our lesson for April the 12th, we continue in the book of Luke. If you look at Luke chapter 24, we're going to pick up in verse 13 where we left off in last week's lesson. And we're going to talk about one of the most interesting resurrection appearances to two men as they traveled on what we know as the Emmaus Road. And that was a significant journey. It reminded me of a journey that C.S. Lewis took one day. Of course, we know C.S. Lewis as a great writer and apologist for the Christian faith, one whose writings have led many people to Christ. What we sometimes forget is that during a lot of his earlier years, C.S. Lewis claimed to be an atheist. And it was only through conversations with his brother Warren and conversations with J.R.R. Tolkien that eventually C.S. Lewis became a Christian. And according to his biographer, one of his biographers, it happened on a specific trip. The ultimate decision happened on a particular trip, September the 22nd, 1931. He says that he was on his way to visit the zoo. He was with his brother. His brother was riding this kind of motorcycle thing with a seat on the side, and he was sitting on this side. And in the biography it says that on his way to the zoo he didn't believe in God, and when he got to the zoo he did believe in God. Now if that was the true conversion experience, that was a very significant trip. Well, we might apply that to this trip that we're discussing in our text for today. We might summarize it by saying, when these two disciples left for Emmaus, they didn't believe that Jesus had been raised from the dead. When they arrived in Emmaus, they did. It was indeed a significant journey. So who were these two people who traveled what we call the Emmaus Road? Our lesson focuses on that beginning in verse 13. Luke confirms that neither person, chapter 24, verse 33, neither of these two was one of the 11 disciples. Of course, Judas is no longer considered, so 11 instead of 12 disciples. These two were not among those, but they were among that larger group of followers who actually were there when Jesus appears in Luke 24:36, and from whom he ascends in 24 verses 50 to 51. So they were a part of a larger group. And it reminds us that after the crucifixion and at the beginning days of the church, it was not just the 11. There were other men, there were other women, and in this larger group there were two who made this trip to Emmaus. Surprisingly, scholars don't know exactly where this Emmaus is. We learn in Luke that it's 7 miles from Jerusalem, but they don't know exactly where. There are 4 different possible sites for Emmaus. But really, the point of Luke in his gospel is not to identify the place or even to identify these two men. The point of Luke in this narrative is to describe an appearance of the resurrected Christ, to teach us some things about the resurrected Christ, and to show how that finally became a part of the moving force in the early church. Now, about what do these travelers speak as they slowly make their way back to the Emmaus Road? Verse 14 of chapter 24, it says, they were talking with each other about everything that happened. That's a pretty nebulous term. Everything that